I was 39 years old the Christmas Eve my mother set fire to the one thing I had poured my heart into. And yet, if I am honest, the story didn't begin there, with smoke curling into the night and the sharp sting of betrayal in my chest. It began decades earlier in the small ways she had taught me that love in our family was something you had to earn, something conditional, something that could be given and ripped away in the span of a single sentence. My name is Marissa, and I grew up as the second daughter in a house where silence was louder than any storm. My father, a man of few words, worked double shifts at the steel mill, and my older sister Clarissa was the golden child, polished, obedient, the one who seemed to know how to say the right things at the right time. I was different. Too emotional, too curious, too unwilling to let things go. My mother, Evelyn, had a way of looking at me that made me feel like an inconvenience she had been forced to carry. Some children grow up with lullabies and bedtime stories. I grew up with the constant hum of disappointment. Still, despite it all, I tried to win her approval. Every drawing I made in school I carried home as if it were treasure. Every good grade, every certificate, every ribbon I laid before her like offerings at an altar. And time after time, she barely glanced, or worse, compared me to my sister. Clarissa's handwriting is neater, she would say. Or, why can't you be more focused like her? My father never interfered. He seemed too tired, too worn down, or maybe too afraid of the battles that would ignite if he tried. So I grew up learning that I had to fight for scraps of affection that never really belonged to me. By the time I reached my late 30s, you would think I'd have grown immune. You'd think the wounds would have scarred over and dulled. But that's the thing about family trauma, it doesn't fade with time. It festers. Even as a grown woman, with a career as a school counselor, with a daughter of my own, I still carried the raw need for her love, like a child holding out empty hands. That Christmas, my daughter Lila was 10 years old, bright-eyed and tender-hearted, the kind of little girl who still believed magic could hide in the corners of December. She had asked me what I wanted most for the holiday, and I had told her the truth, that all I wanted was for Grandma to smile at me the way she smiled at Clarissa. Lila had frowned, puzzled, as if she couldn't understand how a grandmother could possibly choose favorites so boldly. But I didn't tell her the whole truth. I didn't tell her that I had been working for months saving money in quiet secrecy to buy my mother a gift that I believed naively might finally bridge the distance between us. It wasn't extravagant. I couldn't afford extravagance. But it was thoughtful, painstakingly chosen. A silver locket with a small compartment inside engraved with delicate vines that curled around the initials of her 3 grandchildren, Lila and Clarissa's 2 boys. I imagined her opening it on Christmas Eve, the flicker of warmth in her eyes, as she realized that I had remembered not just her role as my mother, but her role as a grandmother. I thought maybe she would wear it close to her heart. Maybe she would tell me she loved me even if just once, and mean it. When I wrapped it, I was trembling. I tied the ribbon carefully, as if the neatness of my bow could somehow tip the scales in my favor. I hid it in my bag and rehearsed the moment in my mind, the living room glowing with the tree lights. Carols faint on the radio, everyone gathered. She would open my box, and for a second, the years of hurt might soften. I clung to that fantasy like a lifeline. But that's not what happened. On Christmas Eve, Clarissa's house was brimming with laughter, with the smell of cinnamon cider and glazed ham. My sister moved gracefully in her hostess role, and my mother sat like a queen in her favorite armchair, surrounded by piles of gifts from Clarissa's family. My offering looked small beside them, but I told myself it was the thought that mattered. When it was my turn, I carried the box to her, with hands that shook slightly, my heart thundering in my chest. She looked at it, then at me. A faint smirk tugged at her lips, the kind of smile that carried no warmth. She tore the paper carelessly, as if rushing through, and when she opened the box, she paused. She held the locket up, turning it under the light. "What is this?" she asked flatly. "It's a locket," I said, my voice too hopeful. "For you, with the kids' initials inside. I thought you might like to keep them close." For a heartbeat, silence fell. And then she laughed. Not a gentle chuckle, but a cold, sharp laugh that cut through me. A cheap trinket, she sneered. "After all these years, this is what you think I'd want." I felt the blood rush to my face. My sister shifted uncomfortably, and her husband cleared his throat, but no one spoke. My daughter's eyes widened, hurt blooming in her expression. And before I could move, before I could plead or explain, my mother stood, walked to the fireplace, and dropped the locket into the flames. The fire caught quickly. The silver blackened, the ribbon shriveled, and I felt something inside me shatter. My gift, my hope, my desperate attempt at love, all gone in a blaze that smelled of pine and smoke. I couldn't breathe. The room spun, and for a moment I thought I would collapse. I heard Lila's voice, small and frightened, whispering, "Mom," but I couldn't look at her. I couldn't look at anyone. That night, I lay awake in the guest room, the glow of the fire still seared into my mind. Clarissa had tried to comfort me, but her words rang hollow. "You know how Mom is," she had whispered. "You shouldn't take it personally." But how could I not? She had burned not just a locket, but every scrap of hope I had left, that she might one day see me, truly see me, as her daughter worth loving. And yet, as I stared at the ceiling, something inside me shifted. Maybe it was rage, maybe grief, maybe the ghost of every moment I had swallowed over the years, but I knew I couldn't go on pretending anymore. Something had to change. The next morning, Christmas Day, I packed my bags quietly while everyone else was still asleep. Lila woke and rubbed her eyes, confused. "Where are we going, Mommy?" she asked. "Home," I whispered. "We're going home." But in my chest, another word echoed louder than any other revenge. It wouldn't come quickly. I wasn't reckless. I wasn't cruel. But the seed was planted, and it grew in the silence between me and my mother. I began to remember every slight, every wound, every moment she had chosen to humiliate me instead of love me. And I realized with a clarity that burned sharper than any flame that I had spent my entire life begging for crumbs from a woman who took delight in starving me. If she thought she could burn away my dignity, she was wrong. I would show her. I would show them all. The first step was quiet. I began to distance myself not in anger, but in patience. I didn't answer every phone call. I declined invitations with polite excuses. I started to say no, a word that had always caught in my throat. And I poured myself into my work, into raising Lila, into building a life where my worth wasn't measured by my mother's cruel scales. But the real reckoning, the one that would change everything forever, was still to come. And when it did, it would happen in front of the entire family in a way none of them could forget. The weeks after that Christmas felt strangely quiet, as if the world itself had gone still to give me room to think. I would wake in the middle of the night and replay the moment over and over in my head, the flicker of the firelight against my mother's eyes, the way she smiled as if she had done something clever, the gasp from my daughter as the locket melted into ash. At first, the memory cut like a knife, but with each replay, I felt the sting dull into something else, something colder, heavier, more deliberate. I began journaling late at night, filling pages with memories I had tried to bury. The time she slapped me across the face when I was 12 because I forgot to set the dinner table. The time she made me wear Clarissa's hand-me-down dress to prom, and when I cried, she told me I was too plain for anything nicer. The time I brought home my acceptance letter to college, and she tore it in half because girls like you don't need to waste money pretending you're smart. Each entry was a wound reopened, but writing them down gave me a strange power, as if by naming them, I was pulling the poison out of my veins. It was around that time that Clarissa called me. She had always been the buffer between me and my mother, but she had also benefited from her favoritism. There was a part of me that resented her, though I tried not to. "You didn't have to leave like that," she said softly. "What would you have done if it had been you?" I asked. She hesitated, then sighed. "Mom she gets dramatic sometimes. You know she didn't mean anything by it." She burned my gift in front of my daughter. I snapped sharper than I intended. "That's not dramatic, Clarissa. That's cruel." Silence. And then almost a whisper. "You're right. But she's our mother. What choice do we have?" That was the moment I realized something important. Clarissa was trapped. She had built her entire life around pleasing our mother, and even now, as a grown woman, she couldn't break free. But I had a choice, and for the first time, I decided I wouldn't waste it. My plan began to take shape slowly, almost without me realizing it. I didn't think of it as revenge at first. I thought of it as balance, as truth-telling. But deep down, I knew it was about something more primal. I wanted her to feel the same humiliation she had carved into me, to watch the ground shift beneath her feet, the way she had made it shift under mine. The opportunity came 3 months later in the form of my daughter's school project. Lila had been assigned to create a family tree. She came to me with construction paper and markers, her eyes glowing. "Can you help me, Mom?" she asked. I smiled, though my stomach twisted. Family tree. What a cruel assignment for a girl growing up in a house where roots had always been poisoned. But I nodded. Of course, as we traced the branches together, writing names in careful letters, I realized how many secrets were buried in our soil. My mother's past was a mystery she had always guarded fiercely, but I remembered fragments, hushed arguments, half-finished sentences, photographs ripped in anger. I remembered overhearing once when I was very young, my father shouting something about another man, and my mother's voice low and venomous, "If they ever find out, I'll lose everything." It struck me then, maybe the past wasn't just painful. Maybe it held power. So I started digging. At first, it was simple old yearbooks, newspaper clippings, obituaries. Then, when I realized how much was missing, I hired a genealogical researcher using money I had been quietly saving for months. What came back made my hands shake as I read. My mother's carefully crafted image of a respectable housewife was a lie. Before she married my father, she had been engaged to another man, a wealthy local businessman. The engagement had ended abruptly after rumors of an affair surfaced. But here was the twist: the affair wasn't with my father. It was with the businessman's brother. And 9 months later, my sister Clarissa was born. I sat there staring at the papers, the photographs, the records, my heart pounding. If this was true, then Clarissa was not my father's child. And my mother had built her entire life, her marriage, her family, her manipulations, on burying that truth. I thought about Clarissa, about how she had always been the golden one, the apple of my mother's eye. Suddenly, it made sense. Clarissa wasn't just her daughter. She was her secret, her proof of survival, the shield she had used to protect herself from exposure. For days, I wrestled with what to do. This wasn't just a secret. This was dynamite, and if I lit the fuse, the explosion would tear through everything. Part of me wanted to burn the evidence, to let it rot in silence. But another part of me, darker, hungrier, whispered that this was the moment I had been waiting for. The stage was set when Clarissa announced she would be hosting a family reunion that summer. "It'll be wonderful," she said brightly. "All the cousins, the aunts, everyone together again. Just like old times." Old times. The words made me laugh bitterly. But I agreed to come, and quietly I planned. The reunion fell on a sweltering July afternoon. The house was packed, children darting between adults' coolers, brimming with soda and beer, the smell of barbecue heavy in the air. My mother sat in her chair, regal as ever, sipping iced tea while people fawned over her. I carried my bag close to me, the documents tucked inside. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from anticipation. When it was time for speeches, Clarissa loved to make things formal. I stood. My voice shook at first, but then it steadied, carried by years of swallowed pain. "I want to thank everyone for being here today," I began. "Family is important, but sometimes family isn't what it seems. Sometimes the stories we've been told are lies." A murmur rippled through the crowd. My mother's eyes narrowed, a warning flashing, but I pressed on. "I've spent months learning about our history, about the truths that were buried, and I think it's time we all know the truth about who we really are." I pulled the envelope from my bag and laid the documents on the table. Birth certificates, newspaper clippings, engagement announcements, photographs, and finally, the DNA results I had obtained by sending off strands of Clarissa's and my hair without their knowledge. The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, stunned silence. Clarissa's face went pale, her hand trembling as she picked up the papers. My mother stood, her voice shrill. "How dare you!" she screamed, but it was too late. The truth was there, undeniable, written in ink and blood. "You burned my gift," I said, my voice cold and steady. "But you can't burn this. You can't burn the truth." For the first time in my life, I watched my mother falter. Her composure cracked, her face twisted with rage and fear. She lunged for the papers, but Clarissa stepped between us, her eyes wide with horror. "Is it true?" Clarissa whispered. "Mom, is it true?" And in that moment, silence fell again. My mother's silence. A silence that confirmed everything. I had thought I would feel triumphant, that exposing her would finally give me the satisfaction I had been craving all my life. But as I looked at Clarissa, at the devastation in her eyes, I felt something else, something unexpected. Guilt, because the truth had freed me, but it had destroyed her. Clarissa stumbled backward, the papers still clutched in her hands. I had never seen her look so small, so fragile. Her whole life, she had been the strong one, the one who seemed untouchable, radiant under the golden light of our mother's approval. But now that glow had shattered, leaving her exposed, trembling. She stared at me as if I had personally set fire to the ground beneath her feet. "Why would you do this here, like this?" Her voice cracked, a whisper, breaking into a scream. I wanted to say that I had done it because the truth mattered, because we had lived too long under the shadow of lies. I wanted to say that I had carried the weight of silence for too many years, and that it was her turn to feel it. But the words tangled in my throat. Because even as the anger roared inside me, another voice whispered, "She didn't ask for this. She didn't deserve to find out this way." My mother, however, deserved every second of it. She stood there rigid, her face twisted, her lips pressed so tightly they looked bloodless. For once, her control had slipped completely. She reached for Clarissa, but my sister pulled away, clutching the papers as if they were both poison and lifeline. Around us, the family erupted in confused whispers. An aunt tried to hush the children and usher them into the backyard. My father's brother stood in stunned silence, staring at my mother, as though he had known, or maybe suspected, all along. I took a breath, steadying myself. "You always wanted me to stay quiet," I said, my voice trembling but clear. "You wanted me to swallow the pain, to believe that my love wasn't worth anything. But this secret wasn't mine to carry. It belonged to all of us, and now we all know." My mother glared at me, her voice slicing through the murmurs. "You're pathetic. Always have been. Jealous of your sister, desperate for attention, and now you've ruined this family with your spite." Something in me broke then, but not in the way she intended. For the first time, her words didn't wound me, they revealed her. Every insult, every dismissal, every cruel act, it wasn't proof of my weakness, it was proof of her fear. She had spent her life building walls of control around herself, and I had just torn them down. Clarissa turned to her, her voice shaking. "Tell me it isn't true. Please, Mom, tell me he's my father." The silence that followed was unbearable. My mother's face contorted, and she finally whispered, "It doesn't matter. He raised you. That's all that matters." But it wasn't enough. The words rang hollow, a weak attempt to glue together a vase that had already shattered into 1,000 pieces. Clarissa dropped the papers, her shoulders heaving with sobs, and ran from the room. The rest of the day unraveled in chaos. Relatives muttered excuses and left early, some avoiding my gaze, others clasping my shoulder in quiet solidarity. My mother retreated to her bedroom, slamming the door like a child, and I sat in the kitchen numb as the house emptied. That night, Clarissa called me. Her voice was raw, stripped of all the polish I had always envied. "You should have told me privately," she said. "You're right," I whispered. "But if I had, would you have believed me?" There was silence on the other end. Then finally, "I don't know." Her words cut deeper than any scream. Because she was right too, our family had been built on denial, and maybe it would have taken a public explosion to make her see. But that didn't ease the guilt that pressed heavy on my chest. In the weeks that followed, the fallout spread like wildfire. My father, quiet, weary, broken, confirmed the truth. He admitted he had known for years, but had chosen silence to keep the peace. "I loved her," he said one night when he called me, his voice ragged, "even when she betrayed me. I thought keeping it hidden was better for all of us." But it hadn't been better. It had been poison seeping slowly through every corner of our lives. Clarissa stopped speaking to my mother altogether. She confided in me occasionally, though her voice was distant, her trust fractured. "Everything I believed about myself feels fake now," she said once. "Even my memories feel like lies." And my mother, oh my mother, turned her wrath on me with a vengeance. She called me daily, leaving messages filled with venom, ungrateful, bitter. "You'll regret this." She told anyone who would listen that I had destroyed the family out of jealousy. Some relatives believed her, some didn't. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care, because something inside me had shifted. I was no longer the little girl begging for her love. I was the woman who had ripped off the mask she had hidden behind. Still, freedom is never clean. It comes with shadows. And in quiet moments, I questioned myself. Had I gone too far? Was exposing her secret worth destroying Clarissa's peace? Had revenge turned me into something cruel just like her? One night, as I tucked Lila into bed, she looked at me with those wide, wise eyes only children have. "Mom," she whispered, "Grandma was mean to you, but you didn't have to be mean back." The words struck like a lightning bolt. I kissed her forehead and turned out the light, but I lay awake for hours staring into the dark. Was I mean? Was telling the truth mean, or was it justice? The line between revenge and righteousness blurred in my mind, and I realized something that chilled me. Maybe they were the same. Maybe the only difference was how much blood spilled when the truth came out. As summer turned into autumn, the family remained fractured. My mother stopped speaking to me altogether, retreating into a bitter silence. Clarissa visited me once, her face pale, her eyes tired. She hugged me without words, and in that embrace, I felt both forgiveness and distance. We were sisters, but we were no longer the same. I thought the storm had passed, but storms have a way of circling back fiercer than before. It was Christmas Eve again, 1 year after the night of the locket. The air was thick with déjà vu as I sat by the tree with Lila wrapping last-minute gifts. My phone buzzed, and when I saw the name, my heart stopped. It was my mother. I stared at the screen, unsure whether to answer. My hands trembled as I pressed the button and lifted it to my ear. Her voice was low, fragile, almost unrecognizable. "Marissa." I weighted my chest tight. "I need you to come," she whispered. "Please. I'm not well." Every instinct told me to hang up, to protect myself, to let her drown in the bitterness she had created. But another part of me, the child who had always longed for her love, stirred awake. And against my better judgment, I said I'll be there. The drive to her house that night felt like moving backward through time. Snow dusted the roads, glowing orange under the streetlights, the same streets I had walked as a little girl with numb fingers and too thin gloves. Lila sat in the back seat, drowsy but watchful, her presence the only anchor keeping me from collapsing into the old role of daughter, who never measured up. When we arrived, I almost didn't recognize the woman who opened the door. My mother looked smaller, her skin pale, her eyes hollowed out by something deeper than age. She leaned against the doorframe, breathing heavy, and for the first time in my life, I saw her not as a towering figure of judgment, but as a fragile human being, frail, broken, terrified. "Come in," she rasped. Inside the house smelled of dust and stale medicine. The fireplace was dark ashes cold. It struck me then that she hadn't lit a fire in months, perhaps, since the night she had burned my gift. She sank into her chair, the one she had always ruled from like a throne. But now it looked less like a throne and more like a shroud. "I don't have long," she whispered. "The doctors, they say it's spreading too fast." Her words twisted in my gut. Part of me wanted to feel pity. Part of me wanted to spit the bitterness back at her. Instead, I stood in silence, my hands clenched, waiting. She looked at me, then really looked at me, and her voice cracked. "I was cruel to you. I know that. I don't know why. Maybe because you reminded me of myself, of all the parts of me I wanted to kill." I froze. Her words slashed deeper than any insult she had ever thrown. I reminded her of herself. The girl she once was, silenced and shamed, clawing for love she never received. For a second, the walls I had built crumbled, and I saw not a monster, but a mirror. She coughed, her body shaking, and Lila rushed to her side, instinctively placing a small hand on her arm. My mother looked at her with a tenderness she had never given me. "You're kind," she whispered to my daughter. "Don't lose that." I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake her, to demand why she could give kindness to my child, but not to me. But then she turned her gaze back to me, and I saw something rare, something I had begged for all my life. Regret. "I don't know how to say I'm sorry," she whispered, "but I am. For everything. Especially that night." My throat tightened. I thought of the locket, of the flames, of the years of wounds carved into me. "You can't undo it," I said softly. I know, she said, but maybe you can forgive it. Forgiveness. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. How could I forgive decades of cruelty, humiliation, betrayal? How could I forgive the way she had destroyed Clarissa with her lies? The way she had burned me down again and again, until there was nothing left but scraps. But then I looked at Lila. Her wide eyes, her small hand on her grandmother's arm, her heart so open it scared me. And I realized something: if I carried this hatred until the end, it would poison me, just as it had poisoned my mother. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean excusing. It meant choosing not to let her ghost haunt me when she was gone. So I nodded, just once, and the relief that flickered across her face was enough. She passed 2 weeks later. The funeral was small, quiet, filled with whispers. Clarissa stood beside me, our hands linked loosely, though her eyes were still distant. My father said little, his grief more complicated than anyone could name. When it was my turn to speak, I stood at the pulpit and looked at the faces, gathered family, fractured yet bound by the woman who had shaped us in both love and cruelty. My mother was not an easy woman to love, I said, my voice steady. She was complicated, flawed, often harsh, but she taught me something without meaning to. She taught me the cost of silence. She taught me what happens when secrets fester. And in her own way, she taught me strength. Because surviving her gave me mine. I glanced at Clarissa, then at the tears slipping silently down her cheeks, and I softened. We cannot rewrite the past, but we can choose how it lives inside us. I choose not to let bitterness be my inheritance. I choose to break the cycle. After the service, Clarissa hugged me, clinging tighter than she had in months. You're stronger than me, she whispered. No, I said softly. We're just strong in different ways. In the months that followed, I found myself healing in ways I hadn't thought possible. Not completely. Trauma doesn't vanish. It lingers like a scar, but enough that I could breathe without feeling the weight of her gaze pressing down. One evening, as I watched Lila doing her homework at the kitchen table, I realized the true gift wasn't the locket I had lost, or even the revenge I had unleashed. It was this moment, the chance to raise my daughter free from the chains that had bound me. To show her that love didn't have to be earned, that kindness wasn't conditional, that she was enough, always enough. That was the gift I had saved for months, years, decades, without knowing it. Not for my mother, but for myself. And in the end, giving it to Lila changed our family forever. So if you're still listening, if you've carried scars carved by the people who were supposed to love you most, I want you to hear me. You are not what they called you. You are not their cruelty. You are not their silence. You are more. And sometimes the greatest revenge is simply living free. If this story touched you, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe, and tell me in the comments what you've overcome in your own family. Your story matters more than you know, and I'd love to hear it.